Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. Today, we're going to talk about squatting for jumping and sprinting. Right. So, if you follow me on Twitter, you follow me on social media, you're going to know that I'm a pretty big advocate of squatting. It's one of the most important lifts, strength exercises, in my opinion, across the entire field, across my weight room, across every athlete that I work with. Okay, squatting is a foundational lower body strength exercise for us. Okay, not because it's a powerlifting movement, not because it's cool, not because everybody else, does things similarly. I'm going to talk about some distinct advantages regarding squatting. I'm going to talk about why we need, to squat to accelerate. I'm going to talk about exercises that actually work, how to make them work, how we coach them and cues. And I'm going to tell you about some things people won't tell you. Okay, some things that they don't want you to know. Um, so, first thing, accelerative qualities need strength. Okay, most efficient path to power is my first little note. Okay, something to understand when it comes to sprinting and jumping. Okay, both are just displays of acceleration, especially short distance sprinting where there's really not any elastic components really happening until you get into top end. So your first really your first 5, 10, 20 some yards are really going to be all acceleration. How much power can you put in the ground to go from 0 to 100? Once you start getting past that 20, 30-yard mark, assuming you're running a 40, you're pretty much going to start hitting your top end speed. Okay. If you're running a 100-meter dash, obviously you're not hitting your top end speed in the 30 and 40-meter mark. You're probably, again, the way the 100-meter works, you're not, basically blowing out your system the first 40 meters, right? You have 100 meters to go. You're probably building all the way up. Okay. You're probably hitting your top end speed right around, I don't know, 50, 60 meters, Olympic level sprinters, maybe a little later than that. Okay. And then they're kind of cruising all the way to the end. Okay. I'm talking about the 40-yard dash. I'm talking about the 60-yard dash. I'm talking about 20-yard dash. I'm talking about short distance flies. I'm talking about things that people actually measure. Okay. Regarding, at combines, at camps, things like that. I don't work with track. I primarily work with football, baseball. Those are my people. So this is the, field sport athletes. Those are my people. So this is what I'm concerned. I'm concerned about accelerative qualities. Okay. In order to accelerate, in order to go from 0 to 100, you got to put in more ground force relative to your body weight, right? Mass specific force, right? So essentially, in order to accelerate your body mass, to make your body mass go faster, you have to put in more force to overcome your own body mass and gravity. Okay. So, in order to accelerate faster, we need to raise that relative strength level. Okay. So, how do we do that? We're going to talk about it in a little bit. But what I want you to understand about accelerative strength, and really in order to accelerate, is that improving accelerative qualities is the most efficient path towards increasing power output and increasing explosive ability for athletes. Not every athlete you have, actually, a majority of the athletes you have are not going to be very elastic. They're not going to be very gifted in that aspect. But all athletes, regardless of how elastic they are, can get extremely explosive. And you can really leverage that first, 5, 10, 20 plus, 20-ish yards range. That's why they say the 40-yard dash is the most important. That first 20 makes or breaks you. It quite literally is a measurement of acceleration. Okay. That first 20 we can manipulate so much for an average athlete. That back 20 is a bit harder because it's more elastic components. That first 20, you could make a very average athlete run a really fast 40 by just really making them super strong and really touching up that initial 20. Okay. When you watch guys go to the combine places, that's really what they do is they touch up that initial 20. It is by far the most efficient path to creating a faster athlete is through leveraging acceleration. Okay. So I do want that to, be said right away. You can't always control how elastic your kids are. In order to make them more elastic, it takes lots of time and lots of inputs. You can make a kid very explosive, go from 0 to 100 very fast. If you're using proper training methods, it's much more efficient for athletes that you don't see all year to leverage acceleration first instead of worrying all about elasticity. Okay. If you're trying to drive the needle as fast as possible, it makes a lot of sense to do accelerated base training. Okay. So my second point here, they lied about squat depth. That's what I wrote in my notes. Okay. You've been lied to. Twitter, social media coaches, they lie to you about squat depth. They say things like they're athletes, they don't need to squat deep. They say things like quarter squats are good for athletes, they're more sport specific. They say things like the higher the better. I don't care about my squats, my athletes squatting. They're not power lifters, they're not Olympic weightlifters. We're not being judged by our squat depth on the field. Okay. They lied to you. Okay. The reason they say this, they're coping with the obvious, thing that they can't coach anybody through a squat, and that they struggle to get large groups of athletes to squat correctly, and or they don't want to, really kind of coach that. Maybe they don't like confrontation. They don't like to have to tell athletes what to do. Maybe they just want to come in and be the cool guy. They don't really want to coach anybody. They just kind of want to come in and be like, "Hey, man, let's do some squats. Whatever looks good to you looks good to me." They're lying. Okay. I'm going to be very honest with you. Whoever's listening to this, squat depth does matter. It really mostly matters just due to the knee flexion. Okay. In order to get a squat to transfer to jumping and sprinting, you really need to have a great degree of knee flexion. Okay. Which means a couple different things. And so we're going to talk about exercises. Okay. But in order for, I think I've had a post on Twitter on this before. Realistically, your optimal squat depth is going to be below parallel. Okay, that's the reality of it. If you want to jump higher, if you want to run faster, look at where your knee and hip starts at in a start, and look where your knee and hip starts at in a jump, or really, finishes through in a jump. Okay, that is your acceleration. You need deep knee flexion in order to develop acceleration, which means you need to squat. Okay, you need to squat deep. You can't squat high. You can't do quarter squats. Can't avoid those deeper end ranges. You need to squat deep. Okay, so. Again, I'm of the opinion you need to squat deep. I'm of the opinion that, we need to get deep knee flexion. And so that's why we squat a specific way. It's why we do specific exercises. That's why we are very specific about how we leverage the weight room, because that's really all I'm doing is I'm leveraging the weight room for speed and power. Okay. So to those coaches who say that you don't have to squat to depth to get good results, that's bullshit. Okay. Um, Exercises that work. Okay. Here's the exercise that do work. Here's the no frills, no BS. Here's the stuff that actually works. Okay. Number one, the box squat actually works. Okay. Your box cannot be high. Your box needs to be low enough to put your athletes below parallel. That's going to be ideal. Okay. If you put some sort of topper on it, even with the topper, you still need to, your end range of that squat needs to be below parallel. That's ideal. Okay. Heel elevated squats, also really, really good. Okay. If you don't box squat, or if you're like me who does both, who rotates, okay, elevating the heel does a couple things. Firstly, it allows for my athletes to firstly get deep knee flexion because it gives them a more stable angle, stable ankle. Sorry. It gives them a better angle to squat and produce force from. It gives them better knee travel, knee flexion. It gives them a lot more stability. And it allows them to really learn how to push their feet when their heels are elevated. Okay, you really can't hinge. If you ever wore like squat shoes before, pretty hard to hinge in squat shoes. You really can't squat very wide in squat shoes because you have an elevated heel. The heel really puts a lot of bias into those quad muscles, and that's really your accelerators of those quads. Your hamstrings and glutes and those things are much more important at the top end, which doesn't mean you neglect them. It just means for the squat, for my purpose of the squat, I'm going to squat to develop acceleration. I'm going to hinge and do other things for those top end, but I'm going to leverage the squat for my jumping and for my starts. Okay. So those are two things that actually work: box squatting and heel elevated squats. Okay. Then we can talk about specialty bars. The straight bar is great. The safety squat bar is great. Really, any bar that puts you in that position. I don't like front squats. Not that I think they're a bad exercise. I just don't love front squats from the fact that you're not getting a ton of load and that you're really limited by instability. When you get tons of instability, you really lack the amount of motor units your body will produce because your body wants to be protected, right? Your body's not going to discharge a ton of motor units, create a lot of force in a position that's not comfortable in and doesn't feel safe in. The front squat inherently puts you in an unstable position because you're in front rack instead of being, on your back or holding it here. The only reason that people front squat realistically, and this is the truth, is because it's a much more aesthetically pleasing squat. Okay. That's the truth of the matter. Coaches don't want to say it. They want to lie like, oh, vertical torso, easier on the back, doesn't hurt your discs. Like, no, the reason is because you can't mess up a front squat. You don't really want to coach a back squat because you can get hingy if you don't know what you're doing, and because it's more aesthetically pleasing and much more widely accepted to front squat athletes. Okay, so we've all bought into this crap about front squats. The reality of it is it's a more unstable movement, which means less load, which also some coaches like. Some coaches don't really want to have really heavy lifters, more stress on them. They don't want to have sport coaches looking over their back, looking over their shoulder, worried about them hurting the athletes. So front squat makes a lot of sense for those coaches. For coaches who are trying to drive the needle, I don't front squat very often. If we do front squats, it is for specifically accessory movement. It is not a main movement. I'm concerned about load. I'm concerned about stability. I'm concerned about motor units and recruiting those to the greatest extent. The front squat inherently limits that. Okay. So not a good exercise from that aspect. Again, coaches will post on Twitter and social media about how great front squatting is. Again, a lot of that is just a cope for them not wanting to face the truth. They either don't know how to coach or they don't want the backlash of back squatting. Okay. I'm not one of the coaches. I don't care. Fourth, focus when squatting. Okay. The biggest focus when you are talking about squatting for jumping or sprinting, you need deep knee flexion. So you need to be squatting deep. Ideally, if you're free squatting, you're talking like below parallel. If you're talking like box squatting, you need to have a box that puts you in that range. We want to be below parallel, ideally, and you want to have your feet at a medium to close stance. If you're too wide, then you start recruiting more hips back, start becoming a hinge, which is fine. If we are using the squat to hinge, which we are not in what I do, I think the squat makes much more sense to develop acceleration and develop jumping. And then we deadlift for a hinge. I'd much rather just squat to squat and do more of a high bar Olympic style squat and then go do sumo pulls and conventional deadlifts and RDL and things like that to hinge rather than just turn my squats into hinges because I'm not really concerned about like how much we can maximally, create in any pattern. I'm concerned about how much we can create in a specific pattern to leverage jumping into leverage into sprinting. Okay. So your focus when squatting, you need to have athletes squatting deep. This is essential. If you don't, their numbers will be whack and they will not get as strong and as explosive as they could be. The biggest cue I have is this. If you're struggling to get athletes that are squatting to depth, here's shit that actually works. Not the Twitter BS, not the simply faster BS. Here's the stuff that actually works. You need to first elevate their heel. This is essential. You need to elevate their heel. I do this for even athletes that have no problem squatting depth because it gives them a better angle, gives them more stability. More stability, better angle is better. Okay. So elevate the heel, and then you need to cue the hamstring to the calf. This is a thing that I've been doing for, really the last year or so, since we've increased, really increased the frequency of our free squatting. You need to get them to understand they need to get their hamstring to touch their calf. There needs to be contact there. Really want to have them try to cover it if possible. And then you want to put them on a heel elevated wedge and you want to have their stance in that moderate to close stance. Okay. So if you're struggling with athletes getting depth, shorten their stance up, turn their toes a little bit wide, so a little bit more out. So don't have them straight, have them a little more out. And you need to elevate the heel and you need to cue the hamstring to the calf. That will literally solve all your kids' problems. You come into my weight room, I don't have anybody that doesn't squat to depth. Every single one of us squats deep. I don't if a kid doesn't squat deep, it's because he doesn't show up very much. And then I'm over there coaching him, cueing him. Or the kids are on his butt about doing it correctly. I literally have no problem with squat depth. A lot of weight rooms have kids that just like they have one kid squatting deep, one kid not because there's no coaching. All of my kids are coached the same in that aspect. We are all going to squat deep. We're all going to make the most out of this exercise. Okay. So try those couple things. If you're struggling to get your kids to squat to depth, try those. I promise they work. If you have more questions of that, let me know. I can try to send you like a demo or something. But that is what actually works. Like I train a lot of kids every single week. That is stuff that actually works in the trenches. Okay. Fifth, okay, what they won't tell you. Okay. Again, I've already kind of like covered some of the stuff that coaches like don't want you to know, like front squatting. Like it's people that are in the know. People who are out from the outside just kind of take some of the stuff at face value. Um, what they don't want you to know is that squatting actually works. A lot. You'd be surprised how many strength coaches like poo-poo on squatting and deadlifting because they don't want to teach it or they don't want to be classified as a power lifter strength coach. Like there's people on the internet that they want to be athletic strength coaches. They don't want to be power lifter strength coaches, but that literally makes no sense. But okay, a lot of people will poo-poo on the squat. The reality of it is squatting works when it's done correctly. You will see your athletes jumping to heights they never jumped to before. You'll see them running times you've never seen them run before if you make these changes in the squat. Okay. So when you have the correct form, okay, like we talked about in this video or this podcast, you have the correct form, you're using these exercise selection, okay, and you are using low reps and long rest breaks, you will create really strong athletes in these specific patterns and you will make them really, really good accelerators. Okay. This is what actually works. Okay. As far as like accessory work goes, I personally prefer to do like a lot of hinging and glutes and hamstring, that type of stuff in the accessory work. On our lower body days, we'll still deadlift 1 day a week after we squat. I don't do a ton of like free squatting accessories as much. We'll do some lunging, some split squats, some unilateral stuff. But really our bread and butter for the jumps is the actual squat. That's the stuff that works. If you squat and jump, jumps go up. If you squat and sprint, sprints get better. I don't know how to make it more simple than that. Like, again, I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling you on a specific book or a specific program or a workout. Like, this is the stuff that actually works. Okay. If you just make your athletes stronger in this specific position relative to their body weight. So if you take an athlete that squats high bar, heel elevated, ass to grass, and you get that kid to squat one time body weight to 1.5 or 1.5 to 2.5 or 2 flat to 2.2, you will see returns every single time. There's no diminishing returns because nobody's nullified gravity. You will see returns every single time. Where you don't see returns is when kids start chasing the numbers and they get out of this specific position. Chasing numbers is great if it's done with the correct form. Okay. If it's not done with the correct form, then you start to see those numbers get out of whack. And then you have kids that are squatting 2.5 times body weight, but they're jumping like trash. The reason you see those distinctions is because the joint angle is not being efficiently trained. Okay. Strength training is joint angle specific up to a point. Okay. There is going to be, some degree of variation. Like, it doesn't have to be, it's not perfectly one to one. Like, you might get a little more carryover, from this degree angle to this degree angle. But the reality is this: you can never go wrong squatting all the way down below parallel. Okay, if you get stronger in that position with a medium to moderate stance, you will always see translation to jumping and sprinting. Okay, so those are things I don't want to tell you. Okay, again, kind of recapping: jumping and sprinting is just acceleration. You're just trying to essentially accelerate mass. If I get stronger accelerating load or mass in this specific position, over time, I will be able to do it better and more efficiently. That is all we're doing with the weight room. We're just using load to create a force adaptation, and then using that force adaptation, sharpening it with the specific skill of jumping and sprinting, and sharpening our rate of force development. That is all we're doing. Okay. To make that very simple, use the weight room to create a force adaptation, and then sharpen that specific force adaptation to the skill that is relevant to you, which is probably jumping or sprinting if you are listening to this. Okay. If there's any questions on other exercise selection, some people ask about pause squats. I don't love pause squats because there's never actually any real stoppage. There's no collision happening. You really can't count on a pause squat. What you'll find is with athletes who try to pause squat, um, either they're gonna, if they're a really good stable squatter, you're still gonna see some really slow kind of, lowering in that, even when they're paused, like you're gonna see some movement, or you're gonna see athletes who are explosive who try to double dip, they pause and they try to get a double dip to get that stretch shortening cycle out of the bottom. The best thing to do is just a box squat. Okay, you have solid depth, you have more stability, and you get a true collision. You need collision in order to create a static overcome dynamic. If there's no collision, you will not create static overcome dynamic, which is that contrast method we use with the box squat. Okay, so you have to have that collision happen in order to get that method. Okay, so pause squats, I don't love them for the athlete. I do love them for a power lifter or that type of thing. I don't necessarily love them for the athlete, just because I don't think there's a ton of carryover for like an actual like power lifter. That's not a bad thing to do. Okay, not a bad thing to do. Still think box squats are better, but could definitely fit it. But with me and working with athletes with limited time, I want to invest all my resources in the things that actually work. Okay. So that would be like one other exercise people bring up. I don't love pause squats that much, so that's probably something that I wouldn't use personally. Okay. A safety squat bar. I would make sure when you have the safety squat bar, really the only difference between a high bar, safety bar just puts you in a position where you have to be a little more quad dominant. It really puts a lot of strain in your upper back. You can't really hinge very well. You really have to push through your feet. That's what the heel elevate does great for us, and that's what like the foam in the box does pretty good too. Is just teaching kids how to push their feet. That's like the other big thing with the squatting. It's not just like getting strong in position. It's teaching kids how to accelerate mass through their feet instead of like through their hips and their ass. So if you teach them how to push through their feet, they jump a lot higher. All my athletes that squat really strong in that high bar type stance, they know how to push their feet. They get to the jumps, they push their feet really well. Same with dumbbell jump. Dumbbell jumps teach the kids how to push their feet pretty well too. Okay. So that's all I got as far as like squatting for jumping and sprinting. Like that's the most important stuff. I wanted to keep this pretty short and sweet so you could like apply it. If you want me to get more into detail on some of these things, like let me know. Shoot me a message on Twitter or Instagram, or if you have my number, just text me and I'll try to, put something together, but like that is the most brief way I could give you. Like, this is why we need to squat and jump, and this is exactly how you do it to get the results that I get, or get the results that some, other really good coaches get using the squat for jumping and sprinting. Like, this is the magic. I can't give it any more basic than that. Right. So hit the like button, subscribe, follow me on social media. I put out a lot of stuff all the time. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna try to get this video up, hopefully pretty soon after the last one. Okay. Peace.